Hello everyone, welcome to the Music Masterclass. My name is Marc Sabatella with Mastering MuseScore, and this is my weekly series where we look at creating music, composing, arranging, and so forth, making our own music and understanding all the things that go into it and trying to continually improve. So I enjoy looking at the music that you all are creating and giving my feedback on it, showing you some things of my own, and it's something we do every week. For much more information on all the topics that I talk about, please see the link I pinned at the top. That's where my main website is, and you can check out my online courses on basic theory, on harmony and chord progressions, and the one I'm working on for counterpoint. So, that out of the way, welcome again, everyone, and just checking, make sure that we're okay here. All right, good. I started a few weeks ago. We sort of created this informal reharmonization challenge, and we got a lot of music that was sort of submitted around that basic idea. One thing I guess I've been surprised by is how widely that topic has been interpreted, which is fine. I mean, I have my notion of what I meant by reharmonization, and it basically means taking a song with a given chord progression to it and taking that original melody and putting a new chord progression to it. And then in order to really talk about that, I'd like to see the original and see the new one. Often I didn't actually see the original melody, or I didn't see the original chord progression, or I saw something involving harmonies that I couldn't put necessarily names to. And that's always interesting, having like kind of unique harmonic concept. So we're going to look at a little bit of all of this today, and just kind of use harmony as the thread that ties all of this together. So I want to really, if I can discipline myself to do so, spend a little time on a bunch of pieces rather than the opposite. So I'm going to do that, and what I'm going to do is I'm opening up these scores. And I'm gonna take a look at a couple of things in here quickly, briefly, to talk about really specific things. So the first thing, though, that I want to do is look at a score that is online but is not downloadable, and we're going to look at it on MuseScore.com. And this is Jim Ivey's arrangement of Did I Do, which is kind of a classic old song. Yeah, 1926, you see right there. So I'm going to play you some of this arrangement, and we're going to talk about it. As far as whether the reharmonization aspect of it, I mean, my guess is I haven't seen the original published sheet music, but these are probably pretty close to the original chords. I want to talk about it to give you a sense of what the language is that is being used here, because this language is language that we can use elsewhere. Oh, that's loud, right? All right, so nice arrangement. I like how it sounds. And yeah, sorry if that was louder. I forget that on MuseScore.com all the audio is normalized, so it's louder. But Hopefully no one's ears were hurt. All right, so what I want to talk about is what is going on in this piece using some terminology that I want to be able to reuse and apply. At the risk of really oversimplifying things, there's there's only a half dozen or so things that you really need to understand about harmony. Now, applying those, learning how to apply these half dozen or so things, it gets, there's a lot to it, but there's really a relatively small set of things. And so I'm going to summarize them, and I'm going to use the fingers in my hand here so I can count them. And I think maybe I'm only going to need 5. So is reharmonization part of arranging? Sure, it could be. I don't know that this particular arrangement reharmonized. I think it's probably pretty close to original sheet music chords. I just don't know that for a fact because I've never seen the original sheet music. And this song, I don't really know the story, but my guess is that was the first time it saw light of day was very possibly published sheet music, unless it was a recording, which is also possible. But for some songs of that era, published sheet music would have been the first time the public ever saw the music. In other songs, it would have been recording. In other songs, it would have been a show or a movie. So I just don't know with this one. So I'm going to look at it in concert key here. This is in B flat. And the first thing that I will say in my half dozen or so things, of which I might not need them all, is diatonic chords are pretty much always good. So if you have a diatonic chord, a chord that's in the key, chances are that's going to work. If it fits the melody, it's probably going to work. But that's just one, right? Where things get interesting is when we leave the realm of diatonic chords. There's only so much you can do with diatonic chords to create interest. So what we have here is the 1 chord. I'm actually not going to keep playing it because it scrolls out of view a little bit. The concert. Actually, if you follow the trombone part. So we have B flat major 7 is diatonic. That's the 1 chord. The next 2 chords are not. F minor 7, that's a 5 chord, but it's a minor 5 chord, right? B flat 9, which is just an extended B flat 7. That's the 1 chord, but as a dominant 7th rather than a major 7th or a triad. So that's also not diatonic. It includes A flat, the note that we see the trombone carrying. And then E flat, with a 6th or not, is diatonic. That's the 4 chord. So that one's diatonic. But then A flat 9 or A flat 7, again, not diatonic. Even the root of that chord is not diatonic. It's scale degree flat 7. And then we come to a series of the D minor chord is diatonic. That's our 3 chord. G7 is 6, but it's dominant 7th instead of minor, right? It's got a B natural in it. C7 is also, it's a 2 chord, but not diatonic because it's a dominant 7th. It has an E natural in it. And then F7. And again, I'm just rounding off these 9s to 7s, kind of ignoring the upper extensions. They don't contribute to the function of the chord. So far we've seen, and then B flat, G7, C minor, C7. The B flat and the C and the F are all diatonic. The G7 is not, because it's got a B natural in it. So we've had a bunch of chords that are not diatonic, but what I will tell you is they all fall into 2 categories. This first pair of chords, F minor to B flat 7 to E flat, that forms a 2-5-1 in the key of E flat. We're not in the key of E flat, right? We are in the key of B flat. But this creating like the sense of a dominant chord, or in this case a 2-5 in the key of where you're going to. You're trying to reach this 4 chord, and we're giving that 4 chord its own 2-5. That is called atomicization, or we can call this a secondary 2-5. The B flat 7 is called a secondary dominant. That right there is by far, the most important kind of non-diatonic chord to understand. You will find essentially no music of any consequence written since 1600 that does not employ a lot of that as its main source of chromaticism. So these tonicizations, picking a diatonic chord that you kind of want to target, and then giving that diatonic chord its own dominant, or in this case, its own 2 and 5. So, can I talk about writing for percussion? Yeah, I will totally do that because we talked a little bit about that during the uh, during office hours. And yeah, Heist, thanks for posting about that on the on the community. And for people who aren't really up on this, those of you who are all access members, sorry, a little side commercial announcement. If you're all access members of my site, um, on Tuesdays, I do this thing that I'm calling the office hours, which is not just me monologuing like this. It's an actual, like, interactive call, like a Zoom call, except it's not Zoom because it's kind of embedded there within the community. And it's really kind of nice because we get to really talk, and I can still demonstrate things, but it's a much more interactive kind of thing. So it's a really great perk of becoming a member. Anyhow, so we talked about percussion a little bit there, but yeah, that's totally worth talking about a little bit more. Okay, so we've had diatonic chords, always good, and then we've had these secondary dominants or tonicizations, creating the sense of a 5 or 2-5 leading to a diatonic chord. This next chord we have here, A flat 7. That's the flat 7 chord. That chord has no business being in the key of B flat, right? It's even its root is not in the key of B flat. What is it doing there? Well, what it's doing there is, in order to see that, I'm going to temporarily ignore the A flat chord and just look at the trombone line here. It's added this G flat. That's the 7th of that A flat 7. That G flat really has the effect of taking that E flat major and making it minor. If we eliminated the A flat chord but just kept that note, eliminated the bass note. So I'm just going to go ahead and put that in a new score here. So give me a moment. New score. Key of B flat, and I will make my melody have B flat for a bar, and then A flat for a bar, and then G for a bar, and then G flat, and then F. So this line here with B flat, and then B flat 7, and then E flat. If I take my E flat chord but just change the G to G flat, I have E flat minor, and then back to B flat. This little progression right here is a really common and important type of progression. And I'm monitoring the chat, and yes, Colleen, I'm also sorry for the loss there. I actually got to perform my piece that I wrote for my father at a recital last night at Regis. And yeah, there's something, the whole idea of memorial services, because I had performed that previously at his memorial. And I know, Heist, you just recently lost a colleague, friend that you wrote a piece for. And death is a tough thing. That's so my condolences to everyone going through any amount of that. So we have the 1 chord here. I'll actually put Roman numerals on this. This is the 1 chord, and then this is 1-7. I'm gonna just call it that, and then this is 4. This is minor 4, and then back to 1. So this progression, this chord I'm calling 1-7. The classical notation for that would be 5-7 of 4. This idea, so we're tonicizing the 4 chord, but then the 4 on its way back to 1 goes through this little chromatic descent. It's called a minor plagal cadence. Those of you who have heard me for more than 10 minutes, I can't not talk about that, right? 4 to minor 4 to 1. That voice leading, ba-da-dum, amen, that's the fancy form of the 4 to 1 cadence, where you use a minor 4 in there. Well, the chord that Jim had in that arrangement was A flat 7, which has that same voice leading in it. So sometimes you see this whole progression. Bum, ba-dum. So you see the minor 4 and the flat 7. That A flat 7 contains that G flat, and E flat minor and A flat 7 have a lot of the same notes. They both come from the key of B flat minor. B flat major doesn't have those notes in it. B flat major doesn't have a G flat in it. It doesn't have the D flat that would be in an E flat minor. It doesn't have the A flat that's in an A flat 7. It doesn't have any of those notes, but B flat minor has them all. These chords are borrowed from B flat minor. So these are called borrowed chords. So we've had a secondary dominant and then a pair of borrowed chords. And so this version, I played all 3 chords. But Jim's version just had the A flat 7, and that's pretty common too in a jazz context. We still have the same voice leading, but instead of using a minor 4 chord, we're using this flat 7 chord. This chord, by the way, is sometimes called a backdoor dominant in the jazz lingo. Backdoor dominant, because it's like it is a dominant 7th chord, but it's not coming in the front door. If you think of 5-1 as coming in, is going home, coming in the front door, this guy flat 7-1 is coming home, but it's coming home by the back door. That is the derivation of that little term. So, diatonic chords, secondary dominants, or tonicizations in general, secondary 2/5s, and borrowed chords. In particular, this minor plagal cadence backdoor dominant combination. That is that everything that was not diatonic in in that song, Deed I Do, at least in Jim's arrangement of it, is one of those things. We have secondary dominant, secondary 2/5 in this case, tonicizing the 4 chord. We have our backdoor dominant, a borrowed chord, A flat. Then we have D. G7 is tonicizing the C. C7 is tonicizing the F. So having a chain of secondary dominants is common also. That goes back to the Baroque. Bach loved that also. Well, in a way. He had his own way of doing that. But then this G7, again, is tonicizing the C. So every single non-diatonic chord in the A section there, other than the A flat, is a secondary dominant. The A flat is a borrowed chord, a backdoor dominant specifically. Then going into the bridge, we have a secondary 2/5 here, G minor to C7. Oh, so I'm looking at the wrong key. F minor to B flat to E flat, again tonicizing that 4 chord. Then we have a D. What is that D doing there? Well, what do you think it's doing there? I'm going to guess it's tonicizing a chord that follows. Probably there's a G chord following it. And sure enough, there is. Now, I would have expected that G to be G minor in the key of B flat, but that G is tonicizing the C. Furthermore, I expect the C minor, the C chord, to be minor in the key of B flat, but the C is tonicizing the F. So again, we have a whole chain of dominant 7th chords here. We have of secondary dominants, D7 leading to G7, leading to C7. 3 secondary dominants in a row, finally landing on the actual 5 chord. And that's basically the piece. So we have the 3 kind of most, in a jazz context, I would say those are the 3 most common situations. Diatonic chords, tonicization, secondary dominants, and these borrowed chords, minor plagal cadences, backdoor dominants. These are all kind of interchangeable terms here. At the end, we get to hear a 4th category of chord, which is actually probably more common than borrowed chords in classical music. This little passage here, you can't quite tell it from the piano voicing there, but I'm going to move it over here. And what it is, you see We landed on well, you can tell it's a B flat chord because the trombone has a D. The trumpet has a C, which transposed is B flat, as the tenor also has a C, which transposes B flat. So we have a B flat in two of the melody instruments and a D. So that is basically a B flat with a D, and I'll put the D underneath it. And then we have on beat 3 B flat with E flat underneath it. B flat, and I'll shorten that with an E flat underneath it. And then on beat 1 of the next measure, we have B flat with E underneath it. I'll just go ahead and enter the E first to make that simpler. And then we have B flat with both F and D underneath it. So I will enter that as D, F, B flat. So let's hear this as written. So Colleen, I see you're asking about harmonic change clashing with the melody notes. Well, then don't do that. You can't. So without seeing the example, I don't know specifically what's going on, but yeah, when you choose a harmony to put underneath an existing melody, the trick is to find something that works. And so once I finish this little thing, I'll start talking about that a little bit more and what it means to clash. But I want to go through this example here. I'm going to put in an additional note here. I'm going to put in an F in the middle. Actually, let me just play it as is again so we can hear this. All right, this time I'm going to put in a third note. Whoops, not that one, G. So let's listen to this version of the progression. And this time I'm going to add even another note. In fact, I'm actually even going to use my mouse. It's one of the rare times when I find mice to be a useful way of entering things. All right, let's hear this version. What's happening here is we have a B flat chord, then going to a C minor chord, C minor 7 in this case, and then we have a C sharp diminished 7, and then a B flat chord again. This progression here in particular, that progression there, the C sharp to the D in the bass, that passing motion, C to C sharp to D, right? This C sharp here is actually connecting to that D. This C is connecting to the C sharp. Someone is probably wondering how I just added that line really quick. So let me just give you a little MuseScore thing here. That is a command under Add, Lines, Note Anchored Line. It's a line specifically to connect two notes. And so there's not normally a shortcut for it, but I use this a lot in creating my handouts, so I defined a shortcut for it so that I can add those really easy. So you can see that line, bum, 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 and similarly there's another line, bum, whoops, this line, bum, bum, and then the E natural to the F. So we get that line, ba-da-dum. That idea that we're using a diminished chord that is created in terms of passing motion in some of the notes. The notes that are not diatonic are resolving by half step to notes that are in the key. This is there's a whole theory around the use of diminished chords and different categories of them, but the basic idea behind all of them, there's like 3 different categories, but they all reduce to that idea, that the non-diatonic chords in that diminished chord are going to resolve by half step to notes that are diatonic in the target chord. So rather than worry about the individual names of secondary diminished versus passing diminished versus auxiliary diminished and these different terms that get used, I just call them diminished approach chords, because they're diminished chords and they approach some target chord with those non-diatonic chords moving by step, almost always a half step. So back to my model here of things and looking at Jim's example, that's what's going on here. We had diatonic chords, we had secondary dominants, we had borrowed chords, and we had diminished approach chords. That, my friends, is the big four. I said there's like 6 things to know. The other 2 are much less common, but augmented sixth chords or tritone substitutions, big in the jazz world, occasional flavoring elsewhere. And then there's like the Neapolitan, and after that it's like there's barely anything else worth mentioning. So, and even the Neapolitan is like pretty obscure, relatively speaking. That augmented sixth chord is pretty hard to live without, actually, if you're like me. But yeah, fingers of one hand will cover pretty much everything that you need to know. So just looking at that really simple 1920s pop song there, we got to see 4. We got to see the big 4 things: diatonic motion, we got to see secondary dominance, we got to see borrowed chords, and we got to see diminished approach chords. We didn't get to see a augmented sixth chord. So let's show you one. I want to show you somewhere where one got used. Well, no, one didn't get used, but I propose using it. So Dean posted this really amazing piece that's part of this series he's working on, and he's just does really, really great work, and at some point I want to dive into it deeper. But just from the perspective of harmony, I want to talk about, now I've forgotten where that section is, so give me a moment. It's somewhere. I forgot to write down where that passage is, and so if I find the discussion of it, that will probably be faster than hunting for it, except it's not, because website's not loading fast enough. Hello, load faster. Reload. All right, give me one of those days. All right, that's fine. Somewhere in this, though, there is a chorale in which, here it is. Found it. All right, I'm going to play you this passage right here. So there's a passage there. I am going to answer Dave's question real quick before I talk about that passage. In that diminished approach chord, two-thirds of the cases they resolve up, the other one they resolve down. And actually, I am just going to show that real quick. If I take these 2 chords and essentially reverse them, actually I'm just going to reverse all 3 of these chords. I'm going to take that chord, paste it, take this chord, paste it here, take this chord, paste it there. And by the way, this B flat, I voiced it with a D on the bottom. I mean, if there's an actual bass, it might just have the root, but it's pretty common to have this in first inversion. Let's hear this. It's the same chord progression backwards. That's also a common progression. So in this case, the motion is downwards. C sharp to C natural. That should be natural. And then E to E flat. And again, that E flat should have a natural, oops, not a natural sign on it, a flat sign on it. I'm remembering that shortcut that I created to add accidentals, and I'm loving it. So in any case, yes, those can go down. So speaking of going down, that's a case of the ones in a diminished chord going down. In secondary dominants, they typically go up. In those borrowed chords, they typically go down. This new category that I'm about to show you is a case of going down. So I want to play that passage again here, and then we will talk about exactly what's happening here. So It's really lovely. How beautiful, how beautiful. It's absolutely speaking. But the comment I made was that this chord felt like it wasn't quite exactly the chord that my ear thought should be there. And he's put some chord symbols in here and hidden them, but the way he's notated this chord isn't quite right. He says A7 flat 5, but there's no flat 5. This is an E natural. Now, if I did make it a flat 5, E flat, let's hear that. That's an interesting chord there. That chord with the E flat, the G, and the C sharp, that is an augmented sixth chord. The E flat there to C sharp is an augmented sixth interval. Typically, that E flat would then resolve down to D. But, he wanted the sound of that ninth on it, but I'm just going to change it to D for now. So this E flat resolving to D is a nice little resolution. This C sharp resolving to D is a nice resolution. We have this augmented sixth interval between E flat and C sharp resolving in contrary motion. So that is what happens with these augmented sixth chords, and in jazz terms we would call this, instead of calling this C sharp, we'd call it D flat and recognize that as an E flat dominant seventh chord. E flat, G, that's the root and the third, D flat would be the seventh. The odd man out here is the B natural. That's not really part of a standard augmented sixth chord. The third note, so we always are going to have that E flat, we're always going to have that C sharp, we're always going to have that G, because that G is going to also resolve nicely to the F sharp. We're always going to have those notes. And then here he's got the G doubled and the other one is resolving up, and that's, good too. But the other thing that we often hear, so we have a E flat, a G, and a C sharp or D flat. That's like three notes that feels like a dominant seventh chord, E flat, G, and D flat. But the third note, the fourth note there, if we wanted to make an actual dominant seventh chord, would be B flat. Well, if I just change this B to B flat, I'm going to get that sound. So what I've done now is change that E to E flat and change the B to B flat, and now I have an augmented sixth chord. Let's hear that. So that sound there, I didn't mean to cut that off quite as quickly as I did. So that sound is a very common sound. So to me, that's the sound I probably heard in my head that I was sort of expecting that he sort of sounded close to, but it wasn't quite that. So as far as reharmonizing what Dean wrote, that's something I might have done, found an opportunity for that augmented sixth chord. Now, again, Dean didn't actually have those notes. He had these notes a half step higher. And the observation that I also made is, well, this chord here adds up to C sharp, E, G, and B, right? That's C sharp, E, G, B. That is a half diminished chord. Well, a half diminished chord, a C sharp half diminished going to D, that's okay, you can have that, C sharp half diminished going to D, but why not make it be fully diminished? All you need for that is a B flat. So instead of taking the E flat down also, that created that augmented sixth chord, I just took the B down a half step, and now I have a C sharp fully diminished leading to the D. Let's hear that. So that's another option here. So that's like three different options for that that one chord there. The original harmonization he had, that was a half diminished chord. the very slight change I made of just making it a fully diminished chord, keeping the same root, and then maybe the more significant change of actually changing it into an augmented sixth chord, which gave me my fifth category of things to know about harmony. Diatonic motion, secondary dominance, borrowed chords, diminished approach chords, and augmented sixth chords, or in jazz terms, tritone substitutions. So, yeah, that is a great toolbox to have, just those things. And then you can take it and apply it to other stuff. So, Joanne has a question about adding notes below the melody. So, I'm not totally sure I understand your question, but you might want to, if you post something, like post an example because this sounds like a MuseScore question, so maybe post it to the MuseScore Cafe space there, the conversation space there, and attach a score so I can understand what you mean. But yeah, I'd be happy to talk about that, or then later if you drop by the my office hours next week. Okay, so we now have our toolbox, and now I can start talking about how we might actually use that toolbox. So as we do that, I want to take a look at Heist's piece while we're here. He's actually got a couple pieces here, but I want to look at just this version here. So first of all, the big piece that he posted is really fabulous. If you haven't checked out this Yona project here, it's really quite amazing. It's got all these different aspects to it. I'm just going to... very dramatic, but it's got all these different aspects to it. As you scroll around, you'll hear totally different texture here. And that vibroslap is part of the reason why we had the discussion about writing for percussion. But yeah, it's got lots of different stuff going on. There's this other texture where we've got this this 5/8 thing. So yeah, lots of stuff going on in this piece. Yeah, I highly recommend checking it out. He posted it a week or so ago. But what I want to do is talk about his piece that he harmonized here. So there's a chorale here that the original version is Bach. And so I'm going to play you that version and then Heist's modified version. So there's Bach. Now, if we skip over, I think it starts here, we'll have Heist's reharmonization of it. So this is the melody. Boo da 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 dum boo ba da 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 da. Excuse my singing, but I wanted to accentuate that melody. Same melody here. Boo da 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 do ba da do da 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 da. Same melody, but let's hear the harmonization. Let's pause one more time, and then we'll hear Heist's. Now, we're going to hear Heist's version, and before I play it, though, I just want to emphasize the point isn't to improve on Bach, it's to have alternatives, so if you're creating an arrangement, you can have different harmonies in different places. So, here's what Heist has decided to do for a second verse. All right, so I like that a lot. It's got that one really unexpected F minor chord. We'll come back to that one. But other than that, it is, I would say, darker than the original by several degrees. In fact, let me pop over to, because I don't really need the inspector at this point, and reopen the doohickey over here. Oh, not that one. Yeah, that one. Oh, I guess I can't. Never mind. Close it again. this version here is, if you look at it, diatonic, right? No accidentals other than sharps. And the sharps are non-diatonic chords, but what they are doing is they're tonicizations. So this is a D chord, but right after that is a G chord, right? So this is D, D, C, D, G, C. D, G, C. So that right there, 2, 5, 1, secondary dominant on the D. And then we have E to A minor. So G sharp is our leading tone in A minor. So it's brighter than the original. Then we again have a leading tone. And by the way, as a point of reference here, you'll see this all over Bach's chorales. This leading tone resolved. This leading tone did not. Right, this leading tone went down. Why is that? Why did that happen? It's actually quite simple and is worth paying attention to. The 1 G sharp resolved up because it was able to, because the melody didn't have the A. The melody didn't go to the root. The melody had the third of the chord, and that allowed everything else to kind of balance out, where we could get a voicing with 2 roots, a fifth, and a third. However, if the melody has the root, well, if he had taken that leading tone up to A, and then he also wanted the bass to go up to A, we'd have 3 roots and 1 third. You can do that, and Bach does that sometimes. Bach absolutely does that sometimes, but other times he seems happier to say, you know what, I'd rather have a fifth on that chord, and I'll sacrifice the resolution of the leading tone to get it. So that's worth knowing. Anyhow, what we see then are the only accidentals are the leading tone that we need in A minor and the F sharp that tonicizes the G. It also happens to come from melodic minor, not that Bach would have been using that kind of terminology. So it's a brighter, it's a bright harmonization. It's A minor plus some sharps. Now, what Heist is going here is much darker. What we see here are flats, B flat, and even an A flat here, which really comes as a surprise, and then a G sharp also. So it darkens the A minor. Anytime you're adding chords in a flatter direction, like the borrowed chord that I used, I showed the use of in D-I-Do. Borrowing that minor 4 chord, that's flatting something. That's taking a scale degree and taking it down a half step. There's a difference, right? You think about a note, you think about half steps as being between two scale degrees, but it's more than that. It's which scale degree did you modify to create that. Flats, like going from 4 to minor 4, meant taking that the third of the chord and flatting it to create the minor chord. So this is what's going on here. He's taking notes that could have been, like this could have been a G natural. In fact, I'm going to make it a G natural for a second. I don't know if he has his chord symbols turned on. We'll find out in a second. Oops, he does have the chord symbols turned on. So I'm going to go turn them off for the moment. Turn off all my chord symbols. All right. So I just wanted to get rid of that change so you can hear the difference between bright and dark here. Oh, and again, he has a G minor chord. I'm going to brighten that with a G, with a B. So right there, it's totally diatonic now, just as Bach's was. Bach's version was also totally diatonic for the first measure. This version is essentially the same kind of idea. If you compare, we have more major chords, F major, C major, C major. only the one minor chord in there, whereas Heist's version here, even with my changes, had more minorness to it. It had a minor chord, and then minor, minor, and then major. So more minorness to it. But that's not what he wrote, right? What he wrote had the B flat so it's much darker, right? It's all minor chords, and he introduced chromaticism in the form of the B flats. Now, if you look at what that minor chord is doing there, it is essentially tonicizing a D minor. This is where this B flat is coming from. He has really created a sense in which this first measure or so is more in D minor. It feels more like 5, 1, 4, 1, 5, 4, 5. I don't know, ish, right? It actually, this is diatonic or closer to diatonic anyhow. It does have a B natural there. I just want to make sure that I really didn't modify anything else. All right, and so I see Wolfram is asking about the use of the two clarinets. You're right that in MuseScore land you could possibly replace one with an oboe. Range-wise, you can't because this note there would be not playable on oboe and probably other places. Plus, it doesn't sit very well on oboe. All these low notes sound pretty terrible. But you might try to find another set of instruments. Maybe make this a clarinet, make the other instrument be an English horn or something. But two clarinets is really fine. It's not uncommon because the clarinet has a really convenient range. And so it's a very convenient instrument to write for in that kind of middle register. All right, so it's a darker harmonization that basically involves tonicizing D minors, and not even with A7, but keeping it A minor, because we're not really in the key of D minor. We're just sort of kind of tonicizing it with this minor 4 to 1, and then another kind of minor 4 to 5. So that is just dark, 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 and that's fine. But that's something that you create, and that's I think what he's after here, because what was the translation? I saw the if I should pass away, yeah, and it was written specifically for someone who had, right? So the darkness is appropriate. I would also say, Heist, I know you probably had to leave by now already, but that's definitely a hallmark. Oh, you are still here. Yeah, the darkness was very likely deliberate, but I think that's also just part of where you come from, right? You tend to gravitate towards a dark minor sound. And yeah, even in MuseScore, it might play that B that's completely out of range, but it's going to sound bad because it's sampling a real oboe where it can't probably sample an English horn for that B, or maybe it sampled a C on an oboe and then just pitched it down. But all the low notes on the oboe they're kind of harsh, I think. So then he brightens up the sound briefly with this G chord. Well, G with E in the bass. It's really E minor. That F minor is like super dark, right? Now we're kind of in the key of C minor. That would be a minor 4 chord in C minor going to G. So that would be minor 4 to 5 in C minor, and then deceptively resolving to A minor. So this is super dark. So creative. I don't know that I would have thought to do that, and yeah, it's dark, but it's quite effective, I think. So this idea that some of those things that I mentioned, secondary dominants typically brighten the sound, because if you have a secondary dominant, what's usually happening is like the 5 of the 5 chord, like let's talk about the key of C. Our 5 chord is G. 5 in the key of G is D7. Well, that involved adding a sharp. If I want to tonicize the 2 chord itself, tonicizing a D chord, a D minor chord, it's going to be A7, which again introduces a sharp, C sharp. If I want to tonicize the 3 chord, E minor, I need a B7, which has D sharp and F sharp. Again, we're adding sharps. If I want to tonicize an A minor chord, our 6th chord, I need E7. That adds a G sharp. Again, we're adding a sharp. The only secondary dominant that darkens the sound is if we want to tonicize the 4 chord, which is what Did-I-Do actually did. Did-I-Do did. It's what Did-I-Do did is actually tonicize the 4 chord, and so it involved B flat 7. It involved the 1 chord as a dominant 7. So in C, that would be C7 going to F, which is what we get to see in the transposed version here anyhow. C7 going to F. So it introduced a flat, which is right there in the tenor part. So that's tonicizing the 4 chord darkens the sound. Borrowed chords darken the sound. We're borrowing notes from the minor key, which is darker than the major key. Again, parallel. If we're in the key of C, in C major, we're borrowing from C minor, not borrowing from A minor. That's got the same notes. So it's the parallel minor. C major borrows from C minor, and now suddenly we have these flats to play with: E flat, A flat, and B flat. So yeah, that's something you think about when doing these harmonizations or reharmonizations is, are you brightening things or are you darkening them? And so this is pretty much darkening. So again, he's using that F minor to A minor sound. That's like, I don't know that I've ever heard that before. What it almost is, if I change, wow, yeah, this is just, if I change that to a B, change this to a D, let's hear this. This is a diminished chord. And if I actually change this to an E, it's now a dominant 7th chord. Whoops. I want to respell that as G sharp. It's just too dark of a the chord is still sounding. That's why, because I accidentally undid that change. Go away. All right, let's hear that now. There we go. So now in the key of A minor, I've just changed this chord into E7 with a G sharp in the bass. Now we have 4, 5, 1 in A minor. Yeah, it's crunchy because it's got that F in the melody. That's a flat 9, which is why Bach often would have voiced that as a diminished chord. And so instead of E7 with a G sharp in the bass, it is an honest to God G sharp diminished 7th. So that is a common enough progression, 4 to 5, or in this case 7 to 1. And all that Heist did, I say all he did, but it's a significant change, is instead of that chord, he gives us this chord. It's got that same bass note, A flat now instead of G sharp, just a different spelling, but it has this C here instead of the B, and A flat as a passing tone down to the A. And again, it just makes it crazy dark. Now this is, I have to say, I have never encountered this ever. And I think it's very, very possibly brilliant. And I mean, it is brilliant, especially if you invented this. But I've never, that I can recall, encountered this. Now, if I think about this in the key of C, thinking of this as minor 4, and then instead of coming to 1, resolving it to 6, I could believe that's happened. Certainly, it's very common for minor 4 to go to 3, F minor to go to E minor. That's super common. I've also seen B flat 7 go, like if I change this to a B flat instead of an A flat down here and give this guy maybe the A flat. This chord, and actually I want this to be a D now. Yep, that's my dominant. Now I have a B flat 7 going to A minor. Now, that's actually in some ways a, let me change this to a quarter note. This is actually a augmented sixth chord, because B flat to A flat, if I respell this as G sharp, I have an augmented sixth chord. So that's common. Also, you could think of it as, a deceptive resolution. If this were B flat 7, which has, again, a lot of the same sounds to it, but keeping it as F minor and then not going to E minor but going to A minor, that combination of things, I just can't say that I've ever seen before. It's stunningly dark. And so, yeah, you've given me something to try in the future here. So I love it. All right. So, yeah, some brilliant stuff in here. And then going forward, the last... That's all diatonic. So diatonic motion, always fine. So what's happening at the end, we have 1, 5, 1. What am I hearing that sounds funny? Why am I hearing a note? Oh, because I am still hearing that dang chord playing. I don't know why. I keep thinking I'm turning it off. I keep undoing things. So the only unexpected chord is this C7. And to be honest, to me, the C7 and the A minor blend together. I really hear that. Whenever you have chords moving by a third, it's almost like they didn't move, right? Like, I think about a C major chord and A minor. They share a lot of notes in common, so it's considered what we sometimes call a weak resolution. And the A, we only hear, like on this little offbeat thing there, he's created like a suspension. So really what I hear is the B flat to the E to the A. That is more or less a Neapolitan. So again, I'm going to revoice Heist's chord for him a little bit here to make it an actual Neapolitan. And this time, and the Neapolitan typically resolves to a 1-6-4 chord, so and it's typically in first inversion. So I'm going to put a D in the bass. You're going to look at this and say, well, it's not the same at all. But I'm actually keeping quite a lot. I'll give this guy the B flat. So this sound here is similar to what he had. He had C7 with B flat in the bass. Well, I still have the B flat. I still have the G. I've just changed some notes around it, the D and the F, to complete a B flat triad, which is the Neapolitan, the flat 2 chord. That's the 6th element of my set of my toolbox here. That would be a Neapolitan, flat 2 going to 5 going to 1. And all this stuff is discussed in my harmony and chord progressions course. All of these 6 pillars I discuss in great detail with lots of examples and exercises around them. So highly recommended that you check that out. So yeah, I actually hadn't expected, because I hadn't frankly heard all the way to the end on that piece and paid attention. I just had it on in the background and hadn't actually analyzed it to see that there was something almost a Neapolitan in there. So we got to kind of have that in there. So not that that's what was there, but that's the sound. Again, I'm undoing all my changes, and I know that means I just undid the playback of chord symbols, turning that off. But So yeah, it's reminiscent of that sound because we even get the G, we even get the F in there that kind of does fill out that Neapolitan, and we get a D as a D flat. But if I change it to a D natural, now only by changing one note, I actually have the full Neapolitan, the B flat, the D, and the F. And all I had to do was change the D flat. So yeah, it does feel very Neapolitan-ish to me there. Yeah, that set of tools lets you do an amazing number of things, including things that I've never even encountered before. This combination. Oh yeah, so the other brilliant thing about that minor 4 chord going to 6 is it's not six. We're in A minor, but it's like temporarily thinking of us as being in C major. That would be minor 4 going to 6, but we're not in C major. So he's borrowing A minor from the we're in A minor. He's borrowing from the parallel minor of the relative major. So A minor, the relative major is C. He's borrowing from C's relative minor. He's borrowing from C's parallel minor. It's a borrow on top of a borrow. That idea of this chain of relationship of the parallel minor of the relative minor, Beethoven used that in modulations. It's part of what made his modulation so distinctively dark. This isn't a modulation. It's borrowing chords in that same manner. So I would say if anyone ever did that before, it would be Beethoven. I just can't remember ever having heard it before. So, yeah, brilliant. I do want to briefly, and I keep wanting to talk about this, but I am going to start this discussion of chordal harmony and then come back to it. So I'm going to play this piece so you can hear it, and then we will. I'll sign off because I actually teach all afternoon on Thursdays now, private lessons at Regis University where I teach. This piece that was posted by Trevor uses chord structures built on fourths, and I had made the comment in the community that it's not doing so in ways that I consider traditional uses of fourths. Not that, fourths themselves are not traditional. You don't start seeing them until close to the 20th century or so. Not that you don't see the interval of a fourth, you don't see these chord structures built on fourths. But there is a way in which fourths are typically used, and so I'm going to explore that more next time. But I'm going to play you some of Trevor's piece here. Actually, I'll just play it. All right, I'm going to stop there because I forgot. Yeah, there's. Was that really the only other? No, yeah, there's more. So we'll look at the other variations and things. But what I wanted to say about the use of the fourths is they're used sort of what I would call inconsistently as far as things go. And Joanne, I do see your question here. Borrowing is the specific thing that I talked about back towards the beginning of this session, using a minor 4 chord. Using a minor 4 chord, so you're in a major key and use a minor 4 chord. That is borrowing. You're borrowing that minor 4 chord because the major key doesn't normally have a minor 4 chord, it has a major 4 chord. But the minor key does have a minor 4 chord. So if you're in C and you borrow F minor from C minor, that's called a borrowed chord. So that's what the borrowing is. This is using a fourth structure, and then coming down, it's also a fourth structure, right? B flat to F is a fourth, E flat to B flat is a fourth, and so it's also fourth structure, and the A flat on top is also part of that structure. If it's a fourth above the E flat. So all of this is within that same structure. The G flat takes us outside of that structure, but then we have another fourth structure here, and this structure here is this A flat in the melody would have been the next note here. On top of that E flat. The G and the G flat are outside the structure, right? And so I'm not saying we're never going to go outside the structure when we're dealing with chordal harmonies, but the way in which we do that is typically using modes, using particular scales that are tied to that fourth structure. In other words, we figure out which mode or which scale which scale encompasses that fourth structure, and then the mode that encompasses that fourth structure becomes the mode that we write our melodies in. Now, in point of fact, a fourth structure that only includes 4 notes can have multiple modes associated with it. And so this G flat could potentially be there if we added on top of that a D flat and then a G flat. So that would put us in the Phrygian mode. And I saw a mention of Phrygian earlier. Wolfram mentioned that in a context that I wasn't sure actually made sense. But I guess the B flat in A minor on Heist's pieces made you think of Phrygian, which is, yeah, that's a legitimate way of looking at it. That was a good observation. Anyhow, so this whole thing of like figuring out a mode that encompasses a chordal structure and then building melodies based around that. In Trevor's case, I know he started with a melody and then came up with this fourth structure. So what I would be doing is exploring ways of not using just this fourth structure, but the full set of chordal harmonies that exist within that Phrygian mode. And there's a whole set of these chordal structures that you can move around within Phrygian. This is the sort of thing that normally happens. So I want to explore that more next time. So Dave, you're still here. I still very much want to see your piece with the original harmonization. Then I can compare and see what you did. So please, somewhere post me a link to what the original theme was with the original harmonization, and then I can do a nice little comparison. So I want to look at that, and I want to look at the fourths harmony next time. So those are the things that I want to do. But what I want to do today is have some lunch and be on my way. So thank you everyone for being here and being here for this deep dive into different aspects of harmony. So so Trevor, yeah, sorry I didn't really take all the time to go into that, but next time I will. But I at least got to set up what I'm talking about. So this is what we do every Thursday here. Hope you're enjoying it. Please pass the word along, share on Twitter, send links, and invite your friends and so forth. And by all means, check out the online courses that I offer. Every last thing I talked about in this thing about harmony is dealt with in great detail in my Harmony and Chord Progressions course. So, until next time, I will just keep writing music. Feel free to post some more harmonizations. And if you want to do some the way that I specifically was thinking of, where you have a song where I get to see the original harmonization and then you show me a reharmonization, that's ideal. Like Heist did with his piece, like I did with mine originally. Then that's like the perfect way to do this, because then I can see what you've done. All right, everyone. Thanks again, and I will see you next time.